Mm. Hey, TF 2266 and Xverda Art. Um, Welcome to the stream. We're doing good. We're going to be talking about how to get out of the U.S. I want to wait till we get a few more viewers so that people catch the start of it, but um, we'll be starting in a couple of minutes. Where are people coming in from tonight? I'm in the Netherlands. We planned ahead. Okay. We're going to have a special section on disability coming up 25th, if memory serves, but you're better off checking our website. Hang on, I will check that. Yes, November 25th. Somewhat depends on the nature of the disability and on details like whether you're on SSI or SSDI, and whether you are, and then whether if you move to another place where perhaps you could arrange your life differently, whether you actually are dependent on that income. Okay. Hi, Josh. In the U.S., looking to get general information, good, you're in the right place. This is about options and how to formulate a plan. Great. Verde, if you drop us an email at volunteer. If you drop an email here and say you're in the UK and might be able to help folks stateside or want to specifically help your friends, That's great. We're trying to organize people in the UK and the EU who want to help receive trans folks. Okay. All right. At this point, I'm going to start. So, okay, I'm Ann Ogborn. I'm the director of Trans Rescue. We're a Dutch foundation. We get trans people out of dangerous countries. To date, we've gotten 150 folks out of the green countries. Our message today is you can get out. If we can get people out of these countries, you can get yourself out of the U.S. And we have confidence that every one of you, whatever your situation is, can get out. This session is to help you make a plan to do that. Yeah, feel free to ask questions at any time. I'll stop and answer them. Hey, Xavier. We are... Yeah, the Department of the Interior that handles passports is controlled ultimately by the executive, and Trump has promised a bunch of executive orders on day one. So it is possible, it is unlikely, but it is possible that as soon as as January 21st, Trump might issue orders affecting trans people's passports. I am going to talk about more about that. In fact, that's probably a good segue to my next slide. You need to make a decision. We try not to have a crystal ball. We try to help you make a plan that depends on your own crystal ball. If you don't think it's realistic that anything's going to happen on the 21st, then fine. That's not something you need to plan for. There are, but you definitely need to make plans for different contingencies, because none of us knows exactly what's going to happen. Here, for example, is an example plan for a family that contains a trans member. They've decided they want to have a plan for an immediate bug out in case things go bad. And I would encourage you, to the extent you can, to have such a plan. That is, what I don't care about the consequences. I just need to be out of this country immediately. The jackboots are kicking the door in. So they've assembled a bug-out bag. They all have passports, and they live near the Mexican border, and their plan is to just go to Mexico. But they're also wanting to be out by the 20th, depending on what things look like between now and the 20th. So they're trying to sell off property and watching the news carefully, and if they decide they need to get out, they'll all just go to Europe, backpack around. The parents will look for work, and then but they'd rather have 6 months. That way they can interview remotely for jobs in the breadwinner's career. The child can finish out their last semester in school, and they can work with their own company to get a transfer to the EU, which they think is possible. So each of you is going to have to make some kind of a similar plan of, and the timing that you are expecting is honestly going to depend on how you read the situation. I would suggest you plan for the fact that there is uncertainty in that. And so to say, well, if I think things are looking bad, I will do this. Okay. The first step in any plan is to get a passport. You can do this through the official site. There is a one-day urgent travel service, and we encourage using it. You will have to demonstrate that you have upcoming travel. You can get a book. There is a book and a card. The book is $130. The card is $30, and then there's $35 fee additionally. But you do not want just the card. I would recommend you get both the book and the card, because in the coming years, having one more piece of ID could be quite invaluable. You be given the option of getting extra pages. Take it. When you go to, you'll have to go physically to the passport office to do this, and when you do, they will not have change. You will need exact cash, so bring change with you that day. Bring passport photos. We recommend that those be from the old kind of technologically obsolete passport photo service in Walgreens type thing, rather than something you made yourself on your own printer, because you don't want to get there and then discover that your passport photos aren't accepted, and they will accept everybody who's just churning them out in bulk. Once you have that passport, be aware, if you say to the like an embassy, I am expecting to have visa conflicts. I am going to be going, for example, both to India and Pakistan. Then you can get a second passport. The reason this is very handy is you'll never want to be stuck without ID, without your passport. And in many cases, in order to get a visa somewhere, you will have to turn your passport in, and then it'll be returned to you with the ID glued in it, or with a visa glued in it, particularly for any kind of permanent residence type visa. And given the state of things, that document may not be easily replaceable. Should you renew, if your passport doesn't have a lot of time on it, you should consider whether to renew. The upside is, of course, you'll have more time on your passport. The downside is that you will have to let go of your passport so it can be renewed. You also should consider at this point whether it's wise to get an X on your passport, if that's an option for you. Because, for example, Dubai will not let you enter with a passport with an X on it. Not that many of you are going to choose to go to Dubai, but it is a major hub. And as things get worse, we're seeing things get worse in many places. And Trump has, and J.D. Vance has promised to quit issuing X passports, and has a proposed bill on his official website to stop issuing them. And it may be you may become one of the first people who feels the lash. It is more important to have a passport than to have one in your correct name and gender. Certainly having those is best, but don't delay leaving, don't delay whoops. Hello. Okay, I think we're back. My stream was telling me that I was having trouble. So I'm assuming if we had a gap, somebody tell me. But Random Watcher Zero asks, okay, I passed, but my IDs are dead name and gender. I'm getting a passport for the first time. Should I select my real gender marker or keep it as what's on my birth certificate? Which is safer? Honestly, it's a call. Your passport is more likely to be invalidated if you choose your new gender, and your new name. I assume you have some paperwork showing your name change. On the other hand, if you do have it changed, then it's changed, and that'll make traveling safer and easier. If it was me, I would go ahead and change it. Random Watcher then asks, can they pass a law to make mismatching passports invalid or a crime? Yes, they can. However, the laws of the United States stop abruptly at the water's edge. Less abruptly than they once did, but still, if you are outside the United States, you are not subject to U.S. law. You are subject to the laws of the country you're in. You are, whether your passport will remain recognized by the United States and whether that impacts whether your passport is recognized by other countries is an open question. Countries are likely to continue to recognize your passport because they are likely to basically not want you to be a stateless person on their territory and would much rather you be entering under normal conditions. If you enter as a stateless person, that makes it almost impossible to remove you. So we expect that people will tend to do that, but it's not guaranteed. Okay. All right. Certainly, there is, before I go on, there is a historic precedent for this. The Nazis invalidated Jews' passports. They stamped a J in them. And the rest of the world largely ignored this and allowed people to use their passport to leave. However, if you were in Germany, you were not allowed to leave the country using that passport, other than for a while you could leave, but you could only take basically about $10 with you. And then later on, they weren't letting anybody out, and it was a problem. The next step is to get emotionally prepared and to get your interpersonal life ready to leave. Your family's going to have feelings about it. Your spouse is going to have feelings about it. If you're in contact with your family, with your birth family, they are probably going to have complicated feelings. Oh, this isn't necessary. They may not want to admit that this is happening. If they've had limited acceptance, they may not want to admit that they're part of why this is happening. And they may just generally not want to admit this is happening. I'm speaking to a large number of trans people who have parents or family members that are dependent on them, and yet are not very accepting, and so that's kind of a bad dynamic, and those folks don't want you to leave. If you have a partner, either you are, almost by definition, either you are more anxious to get out than they are, or they are more anxious to get out than you are. It's unlikely that you are exactly in sync. For many of us as Americans, we've never traveled abroad. There's a way of addressing that one, and that is watching some happy travel videos. I discourage sort of danger travel wherever, but watching, finding out more about the world can be a good thing. The world is not certainly the U.S., Canada, the EU, and hell. There are many wonderful places in the world. This is all scary, and coming to terms with it is definitely part of the process. Comments? Anybody going through some of that? I'm going to keep talking, but if people say things or have questions, I'm happy to kind of stop and back up. There's a bit of a delay in this transmission between when I talk and when you see me. Okay, we're going to talk about some ways to get out. Some of the normal ways that people immigrate, work visas and various treaties, retirement. And then we're going to talk about something called Rentista. This is a program that allows you to do remote work in a place and then live there essentially as a permanent resident as long as you do this remote work. We'll talk about ways to get citizenship. It's surprisingly reachable. Some of you might get citizenship in another country. We'll talk about a system we call the hippie trail or perpetual traveler, where you join a kind of peripatetic lifestyle of that. There are large numbers of young people who are just kind of traveling around the world, footloose and happy, fancy-free, and you can join them. We're going to talk about a way called border life. Border life is basically moving near the border and then leaving your legal presence in the United States, but actually de facto living in Canada, so that if things do go bad suddenly, you're in Canada, hopefully, and only coming back occasionally, and then if things get seriously bad, then you just don't go over the border anymore. And at that point, Canada probably is more willing to accept you. And then we'll talk about some ways that don't work, that we don't recommend. Okay. First off, work visas. If you find work overseas, if you have technical skills, this is fairly simple. There's a shortage of caregivers, which need not be a particularly skilled occupation. It's not particularly pleasant work, but it is a way of getting out of the United States and looking around to find something better. You can look for in the UK it's called a carer visa, and in many places it's called a working holiday. But these visas are easier to get. There are au pair programs. So some of these, even if it doesn't seem like you have a technical skill, that's an option. just finished speaking with an HR person at a tech firm, and she advised me basically if you are trying to come, she was in the UK, she suggested Indeed.com. Basically, just conduct a normal job search. If you can afford it, come to Europe or South America or wherever you're planning on moving, and pass resumes. Basically, you can write ahead. You can write to companies you're interested in and say, I will be in Europe between this date and this date. Can we set up a time to talk? That's more effective than sending in resumes remotely. So, questions about work, getting a work visa? The next option, if you, somebody warned me if the stream actually dies, my feedback stream is intermittent. The next option is if you are over a certain age, you may be eligible to just go ahead and retire, or you may have enough savings that you can live until your Social Security kicks in if you live someplace inexpensive. $500 a month is yeah, Josh, let me return to yours under the section on Rentista. It is exactly made for your situation. So, but even if you are, if you're 50 and you have $30,000 in the bank, you probably can move to the Philippines and either do only kind of little things that you think are interesting, or just generally stop working and be there for many years and reach retirement. Many countries will accept you if you have a retirement income. So, yeah, Josh, we can set you up. So you might be surprisingly young and be able to retire if you're willing to live, say, in the Philippines or Brazil or Argentina, someplace less expensive. Many of these places, they have expat communities. Expat sites can be an excellent resource. Okay, the next thing we're going to talk about is the DAFT Treaty. And Josh is actually one option for you, but it's not probably the best. The Dutch-American Friendship Treaty is an agreement between the Dutch and the U.S. An American citizen can come to the Netherlands, deposit 5,000 euros in a Dutch bank account, and leave it there, establish a Dutch company, which is fairly straightforward paperwork and costs a few hundred euros, and then receive permission to live in the Netherlands pretty much like any other permanent resident, do everything except vote, and eventually you'd be eligible for citizenship in 3 years if you speak fluent Dutch by that point. However, the only work you can do is to operate your company. You cannot work for a company. However, many things can be fit under that category. Instead of me working, cleaning your, instead of me working as your marketing director, I can provide marketing consulting services to your company, which de facto just means I work for you. So most of these daft companies are consultancies. That way, if one thing doesn't work, then you can try another. They do require that you be what's called a highly skilled worker. That means either you have a college degree or you can demonstrate a basically similar level of experience. So if you've been a machinist for 30 years, you may not have a degree, but you can demonstrate that you're a highly skilled worker. But if you've been working in a grocery store, this is going to be more difficult. Okay, questions about that? That's a very good way to get to the Netherlands. It's actually the one I used. Okay, Josh, now is your time. Many countries, particularly Central, South America, Southeast Asia, although almost every country has some variant of this, offer what's called a remote worker visa. If you are countries want money to flow in. If you are working for your US-based remote job, then money flows from the United States to Ecuador or wherever you're living. But if you decide to go grab a pizza, you're going to buy an Ecuadorian pizza. So you'll pay the local Ecuadorian pizza place. That means that's very good for their economy. Can you work with Dutch clients with just English? Yes. In fact, all Dutch people learn English in school. Anyone under the age of about 65 will speak excellent English. They may not prefer to do that in the workplace. That is, people may slip back into Dutch. But frankly, I've lived here 3 years and my own Dutch is pretty poor. And but yeah, I've found it a minimal hassle. It's more of a social hassle. I do certainly recommend that you start studying Dutch. If not before, then as soon as you get here, get on Duolingo. If nothing else, otherwise you'll become socially isolated just because you find yourself with the people, it's a little harder to kind of make friends and integrate yourself into society if you don't speak Dutch. So, okay, back to rentista visas. So, a rentista visa, you pay, you have to demonstrate that you've been working remotely for about a year, and you may have to demonstrate that you had a constant income, and there's often a minimum, and that minimum can be kind of crazily large compared to the cost of living in the country. So, for example, I believe for Ecuador it's 24,000 US dollars a year, which is enough to live like a king in Ecuador. But if you can demonstrate all those things, which if you have a remote job in the US, you probably can, then yeah, you can get permission to live in Ecuador. There's sometimes a limit to how long you can stay, but it's often like 5 years or something. And the expectation is that you'll kind of be there for 5 years and then move to another country with a similar situation. I know plenty of rentista people who have actually gone ahead and bought homes, for example. Okay. One thing that can be a problem with a rentista visa, sometimes you have to demonstrate that you made exactly the same amount every month and that that's going to continue, because they've kind of said, well, this is kind of like a retirement visa, but that's rarely how people with a remote job work. Even if you have a regular paycheck, it's likely to bob up and down some. But many countries have figured that one out, and many are changing their rules away from that because they realize it's just not realistic. The majority of remote workers are gig workers and say things like you must have an average of. So, okay, more questions about remote work? Josh, this is definitely it's common in many countries. Particularly, it is common in countries where cost of living is lower, because that's the places it's most attractive, both for the country and for the person who's going to do it. If you can go to Suriname and live in Suriname, which is a beautiful place and has a very large expat community, and do this in a few years, frankly, you can save up enough money if you have a tech job. If they don't change your salary and you do this for 2 or 3 years, you have enough to do citizenship by investment and can go wherever you want. You'll basically become wealthy, because your living expenses are just likely to be very low. Okay, next I am going to, all right, many countries have some variation. It may be called something else. It's often called a remote worker or digital nomad visa. But I've even seen it called a foreign compensation visa. But yeah, check out countries you're interested in. Very popular in Central and South America, and it's common in the Philippines too. I believe Korea has one. And I believe Thailand has one. Okay. Getting citizenship somewhere may sound completely crazy, but it's not. It's possible. If you have, we're a nation of immigrants, and if you have a parent or grandparent who was a citizen of some other country, or is a citizen of some other country, was born someplace else, it is quite possible that you can qualify for citizenship by heritage or descent. And if you're in, and for some countries it's 3 or 4 generations. If you suspect you might be in that situation, that is, if you have a grandparent who is Irish, for example, then drop us an email saying with citizenship consult in all caps in the subject line, and we will get that over to the expert we have on staff. We have somebody who is an expert in doing these citizenship things, and they can help you through that process. Okay? All right. A second way to get citizenship is this was originally intended to drive money into countries. You'll see many of these methods are about whether money flows in or out of the country. If you have the funds to invest in a business in the country, it's about $250,000 for most countries. You can just get handed citizenship. They'll just hand you a passport. If that probably sounds out of reach for most of us, but if you own a home, that might be a much more reachable figure. And there are places where that number is as small as $50,000. The lowest number is $18,000, but it's Pakistan. So, but there are more tolerable places. Dominica is $50,000, and if you're willing to invest a substantive chunk of change in Dominica in a business there, you can have a different citizenship, and then of course you can live there. So that's an option, and that business can, however, be a residence. So if you own a home, it's quite possible that the majority of that will be made up by equity in your home. So if you sell your home in the United States, buy a building somewhere, that can actually be sufficient to get citizenship by investment. I know people who did that. They sold their house in the United States, moved, in this case, to Turkey, and purchased an apartment in Turkey, and then got a Turkish citizenship, and now they are basically able to stay in the United States and then go to Turkey whenever they want and live there. Finally, you can get married. The thing I would say is don't do a sham marriage. If you're going to get married, actually get married. The sham marriage is that's a very old dodge to get around immigration, and the authorities are very much wise to it and have good tricks to stop you. I've even spoken to people who were actually married who felt like it really was tough to get through the process. The other thing I'd say is if you are considering getting married at this time, consider whether you want to get married in the United States or get married in the other country, and your marriage might be invalidated under Trump. So, and that might actually complicate your presence or your spouse's presence in the other country. So, for example, if there are two of you, one of you is a good candidate for a DAFT visa or contain work in, say, Germany, you might consider getting married both in the United States and in Germany. So that if your marriage is then invalidated in the United States, the Germans don't say, well, you're no longer married, and boot your spouse out. Okay, questions about any of those? And, okay, there are about 600,000 young people bopping around the globe, doing a variety of tourism type activities. These vary from just hanging out someplace where the living is cheap to something called volunteer tourism, to au pair schemes, carer visas. There's a number of schemes. Many governments feel like it's a good thing to let young people experience the world so that when they return to their home country, they know more about the world, and everybody feels like that reduces xenophobia. But most people, young people, don't have the funds to just do that without some kind of support. There's a large industry grown up called volunteer tourism. Essentially, you go someplace, you do some amount of work every day, and in return, you're given a place to sleep and food. So your only expenses are things outside of that. Many of the sites have become commercialized. At one extreme, there are sites for college students on their gap year that charge for volunteer experiences that are quite dodgy, and I don't recommend those. And at the other extreme, for example, woofing is willing workers on organic farms, and you basically go to an organic farm and do usually some form of ag labor, and in return you are just given food and shelter. And most of these, and the WOOF site, there is a wwoof.net. They charge, I believe it's $35 to join the international one. Many countries have split off, so quite often you'll have to join the national one as well. Workaway is a bit more expensive. It's $59 a year. Workaway has a wider variety of kind of volunteer work experiences, working with NGOs and caring for the elderly, teaching English to children, those sorts of things. ESL is often English as a second language teaching is a very common way for people to go abroad. There are au pair programs. These essentially give you a visa. You come, the government mediates this, and you come to a country. You either do housework or you take care of someone's children. You're given a place to stay and meals and a small amount of money. In the Netherlands, for example, it's 340 euros a month. But you can stay for a year doing that. There are often work experience things that essentially will give you a one-time, 1 year work visa without too many limitations. So basically the hippie trail, check out Lonely Planet, check out being an expat. If you have some savings, particularly this to get you started with, this can be a pretty easy thing to do. We actually do this sometimes with our passengers out of dangerous countries. They sometimes end up kind of bopping around places that we really don't want folks to settle down while they're on the road. So to make ends meet, they'll sometimes do these things. Okay. Another tactic is something we call border life. Basically, you move. This is the Peace Park in Seattle. You can see that there's basically that Vancouver and Seattle are basically up against each other. I think it's actually Tacoma, and there's even a park that was deliberately placed right on the border and has a arch of friendship in the middle of it with no border control. In practice, they are aware if you go in one end of the park and leave it out the other. But crossing the border into Canada is very easy, very straightforward. And if you do that frequently, you can stay in Canada up to 6 months. But if instead what you do is you keep going over to Canada, and but you keep your residence in the U.S., well, everybody's happy. So if you make your residence in the U.S. just a post office box, but you retain your U.S. bank account, you can rent a place in Canada and effectively be living there and only come into the U.S. occasionally and irregularly. And then if Trump invalidates passports, hopefully you're on the Canadian side. You take all your money out of your bank account that day, and you're now at least outside the United States physically and not trapped. So this is a pretty doable thing. You may also run into, you'll start developing friends and local connections in Canada, and you may go from being from frequenting the local independent coffee house to ending up working for it and getting a work permit that way. You can get, this is a way to get over the border and be out. So this is particularly a workable scheme if you don't have a lot of money. This is a cheap scheme. But in general, you don't have to reside where you officially live. So if you can even find a place where you can go and have permanent residence, for example, if you can get citizenship by inheritance in Italy, you don't actually have to live in Italy. You can just travel on an Italian passport. Okay. All right. Okay, some ways that don't work. Many people ask us about asylum. We recommend that you do not. You can always apply for asylum. You always seek asylum, but frankly, you're not going to be successful. Not from the United States, at least at this time. That may change. We hope it doesn't, because one of the things that would have to change is that you would be in danger of death, torture, severe bodily harm, long imprisonment, or conditions intolerable to life if you return to the United States. That is, basically immediately would be killed. And you can see that is not the current conditions. And sadly, when those conditions do arise, it's going to take a time for governments to catch up with that fact, particularly since the United States is a powerful country. They don't want to be the one who says, oh, the U.S. has become a bad place. So unfortunately, asylum is not a realistic option at this time. And frankly, going into an asylum system carries with it a lot of restrictions. It's a very hard life. You are essentially signing yourself up for something that looks like work release jail sentence. Another is going somewhere and then just staying you go on a tourist visa and then just don't leave. That's called overstaying. The only problem with it is that if you are caught and ejected, it may make it harder to move around to other places. It can be the best option at the time, but we'd suggest to you that you're actually better off following the rules. Finally, there's a thing you should not do, absolutely, and that is be careful if you have a 17-year-old trans friend with non-sympathetic parents and you help them move without their parents' knowledge or permission. You have committed, and they leave the country, you have committed the crime of child trafficking, which is a fairly severe felony. And we certainly don't want to see any of you end up in prison. Certainly, if that came to trial, you would be cast as the evil person sucking them into transgenderism. So do not do that. Okay, some issues that are going to come up. You're going to have various commitments, and this can be everything from I am successfully building up the local orchestra to I really like my team at work, to I'm taking care of my parents, and you're going to have to look at how to get shut of those. Moving your possessions abroad is quite expensive, you might start, and particularly if you are short money, I would say, and you're planning on leaving, I would say start basically putting most of your stuff on eBay. If you have disability payments, you are going to have to cope with transferring those, which may or may not be easy. We are having a special session on the 25th about disability. And finally, money. This is not the time to splurge. Save money. You're going to need it. Money will make your post-exit life better because it'll give you more options. Okay, since you've been patient and waited through my presentation, I'm going to give out our super secret email address that we try and prioritize questions that come in on this email address. I'll give people a moment to copy that down. Okay. All right, your next steps. There are going to be a bunch of special sessions. If you're going to Canada, there's one in an hour from now. If you're disabled, needed disability information. November 25th. There's one on Daft. Current politics in the Netherlands are fine. It is not a first past the post system. It's a proportional system. So while at the moment the prime minister is a pretty right wing guy, it's a very weak government, and it's actually not nearly as bad as that would be in the United States. I feel perfectly safe here. I have no intention of moving, and I cannot really remember an incident of transphobia in the Netherlands. I can remember a couple of incidents of kind of grouchy old guy xenophobia, but I've been pretty welcomed by everyone. The local trans support group here is actually partial, receives funding from the government. They meet they don't really need any money. It's a support group, so they meet in a local gay bar, and so on trans night in the local gay bar, the first two drinks are free, courtesy of the Jumenta, the city government, and I'm routinely kind of welcomed into, by local politicians and business leaders, and I've had a number of them say, "Oh, we're very proud that this is in our city," and so we feel very comfortable and welcomed here. Healthcare is a little well, it's not a little; it's a lot gatekeepy, but that is something that is currently improving rapidly. There was protests about it a couple of years ago now, and that's really helped. There was a single gatekeeping clinic was the big problem, and there's now a group of physicians has started in an alternate clinic that is much more reasonable, and everybody's going over there. So that's what's kind of the state of healthcare. But we had somebody who was a passenger who was here relatively briefly, and I actually went down and asked my physician if there was any way we could get him on HRT while he was here. And they said, yeah, well, we can get, if it's a one-time thing, I can just get him in to see your doctor. So we did that, and he walked out, and literally in the same building, walked over and got, and they said, yeah, we don't actually have like testosterone here today. Come back tomorrow. So the next day we walked back over there and picked up testosterone. So it's pretty, it's relatively simple to get on HRT, particularly if you were on HRT someplace else. So, everyone here is required to have health insurance. It's the law. And my health insurance, I'm an old lady with various health problems, and I pay 124 euros a month for my health insurance because I have the expensive old lady insurance. Okay, so next steps. Let's see here. It's pretty common. Yes, the rentista visa it's fairly common, particularly, like I say, if you get outside of, if you find countries where the cost of living is lower, and that's mostly just because it makes more sense in such countries. Next steps, be at the relevant special sessions, get the loved ones on board, get ready to move, formulate a plan, and get out. Okay, that's it. People have more questions, I'm happy to answer them. If not, I guess we'll end. I'll wait. There's a bit of a lag, but as soon as I'm convinced there won't be any more questions, I'll make an end of it. I thank you for sitting through this. We have office hours. The office hours are just me hanging on, or one of our staff on a Google Meet call that's publicly open. You can just drop into that call and into the video call and just ask questions, and it's pretty much the same as the old consults. We're just willing to talk with you about your plans, or even just about like, oh, I'm feeling really overwhelmed by this, or pretty much we're open to whatever's going on with you. If you were shy about asking questions in the chat, this can be better. Occasionally there's somebody else in there with you, but honestly at the moment mostly it's people coming in one at a time. Okay, thanks. I will see you around. Good luck. And we do have the Canada thing starting in 54 minutes. So, okay, bye-bye.